Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today to discuss the Agnes Greenway project. We are happy to have the opportunity to meet with you and to obtain your feedback on the interim Greenway and obtain your input on priorities for the permanent design. My name is Brian Patterson. I'm the project manager for Urban Systems, the consulting team who is working with the City of New Westminster on the Agnes Greenway project. The Agnes Greenway is a new 1.2 kilometer greenway along Agnes Street that is intended to support walking, wheeling, and cycling. The first phase of the greenway extends from Douglas College at 7th Street in the west to Dufferin Street in the east. The greenway will ultimately provide a connection from New Westminster SkyTrain Station and the Waterfront Esplanade to the Patello Bridge replacement project in the east. The greenway will include a two-way protected bike lane on the south side of the street for people cycling, as well as improved sidewalks for people walking and new landscaping, trees, and street furniture like benches along the corridor. What we're focusing on through this open house is primarily what you see on the map here, the pink dotted lines, which is phase one of the corridor. And this first phase of the corridor is really looking at the interim and permanent treatment that we'll be talking about tonight. And phase two, the green line, will be implemented in future phases. So the Agnes Greenway project is part of the City of New Westminster's commitment to sustainable transportation and climate emergency response. It was originally envisioned over 10 years ago when the city developed its downtown community plan. And the Greenway has also been prioritized in Council's current strategic plan, as well as the downtown transportation plan that was adopted by Council in August. The project, as I mentioned, is being installed in two phases. So the first phase that you will have seen out there was installed back in December and January. And that is what we're calling, again, an interim design. And we've installed that interim design to spark this community conversation about what we're having today and through this round of public engagement about the future of Agnes Street. The engagement on the interim design through this process is being used to help inform the permanent design, which will be built later this year. So there's a number of key objectives and broad aspirations for this corridor to create a great street for all road users. And so a number of the objectives are shown on the slide here. Firstly, it's looking at how to create a cycling route for people of all ages and abilities. And that means providing a physically separated protected bike lane, similar to what you see out there with the interim design, with flexible bollards and concrete barriers installed along the corridor to provide separation from motor vehicles and people cycling. But we're also looking broadly at the other users of the corridor and the experience along the corridor. So we're looking to improve the experience and accessibility for people walking. We're looking at opportunities to enhance the public realm, including streetscape improvements and increasing the tree canopy along the corridor. We're needing to make sure that we accommodate emergency access through both the interim design and the permanent design. We're looking to consider the needs of motor vehicles as well and make sure we're maintaining motor vehicle access, but also looking to reduce some of the impacts of non-local shortcutting traffic through the downtown residential areas. We are looking to limit the impacts to people who rely on on-street parking and loading. There have been some changes to on-street parking, but we've really tried to minimize those changes, recognizing the importance of that. And then finally, we're looking at ways to incorporate green infrastructure to manage rainwater runoff and to support the city's tree planting goals. So green infrastructure can mean things like rain gardens and things like that to provide some environmentally sustainable outcomes. So the process that we're going through for the first phase, again, what we're talking about today, it started back in the winter with the installation of the temporary greenway. And again, the temporary greenway, it includes the buffer paint that's been installed along Agnes Street, the white flexible delineator posts, and some concrete barriers. And we're using that as a starting point for the second point in phase one, which is public and stakeholder engagement. And we're using this interim treatment so people can get the experience of what the greenway actually could look like, and using this input to help provide input both on improvements that we could make to the interim design, as well as opportunities to provide input on the permanent design that would be implemented later this year. And so there's two rounds of public engagement we'll be doing. Today, we're focusing mainly on how the current interim greenway is working and getting your ideas for and priorities for the permanent greenway. And we'll have another round of public engagement later on this spring, where we will present some design options for the permanent greenway. So this isn't your only opportunity to provide input. And then the third part of phase 1 is looking at installing the permanent greenway, and that would take place later this year, likely in the summer and fall of 2021 and 2022. And then, as I mentioned, phase 2 is a future phase that would be done through a separate project to extend the greenway to the Westminster SkyTrain station and the waterfront esplanade. So through the engagement so far, we've heard a lot about the Agnes Greenway and a number of issues and comments that we've received either through emails or phone calls or input directly on the webpage. And we've made a number of changes in response to what we've heard so far. And I think that's really important with this interim treatment that we've designed. It actually means it's quite flexible. So what we want to do is learn from people who are using the corridor, what's working, what could be improved, and making adjustments along the way. So the first item here is looking at Lawrence Street, which is originally intended to be the connection between Agnes and Carnarvon Street. Lawrence Street was identified in the previous planning processes as the preferred connection, but through some stakeholder engagement with users and operators along Lawrence Street, they had some operational concerns. So we've since decided to move that short connection to 6th Street instead to provide the connection from Agnes Street to Carnarvon Street. A second issue that we've heard a lot about is related to transit rerouting. Because some segments of Agnes Street needed to be converted to a one-way street in order to preserve parking, that meant that we needed to look at changing the eastbound routing of both the number 103 and the number 105 transit routes. The westbound routing remained as is, but initially the eastbound routing, we moved both of those routes along Carnarvon Street to Elliott Street because of the one-way street routing. But we heard some concerns with that initial realignment about people trying to get up the hill on 4th Avenue, especially if they're carrying groceries and recognizing it's a steep hill. So we adjusted the transit routing to put the number 105 to go up 4th Avenue to Royal Avenue. But that presented some concerns with some people at the east end of the corridor who no longer had access to the number 105 routing to get to Uptown. So we're continuing to work through that rerouting. Ultimately, we want to make sure we provide a facility that's accessible and that has transit access for everybody along the corridor. And we're continuing to monitor and work with TransLink and Coast Mountain Bus Company on that transit rerouting. We've also heard that accessibility is a very important consideration along the corridor, and especially so with the permanent design. And with the permanent design, we'll be looking to ensure that it's universally accessible and finding opportunities to improve accessibility. This could mean things like widening sidewalks, providing curb letdowns, and reducing pedestrian crossing distances, as well as ensuring transit accessibility. We've heard some concerns about loading zones, particularly in front of some of the apartment buildings, and the need to preserve that and recognize the loading needs of users along the corridor. And then finally, we've heard some feedback about neighborhood traffic impacts and people, residents mentioning perhaps increased traffic volumes and speeds on adjacent streets. And this is something we have been continuing to monitor. We've been collecting traffic volume and speed data on Agnes Street and on the surrounding streets, just so we can understand and make adjustments as needed based on those neighborhood traffic impacts. So it's a little bit of what we've heard, and again, through the engagement that we're doing right now, we'll hear lots more, and maybe I'll pass it back to Kelsey to speak about some of those engagement opportunities.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, just briefly to go over the engagement opportunities that we're offering in February and March. So as Brian mentioned, we are in our first round of engagement as part of this project. And the purpose is to really just collect feedback on the interim treatment, including usage, impacts, likes, dislikes, as well as trade-offs to consider for the permanent design. So it's taking place in February and March and includes an online survey that closes on this coming Friday, March the 12th. We're just shy of 200 responses as of today. We also have a Map It tool, which we have been using to collect feedback, location-specific feedback on the interim greenway. We also have today's virtual open house. We're running another one at 6 p.m. tonight. We've held a series of stakeholder meetings over the past few weeks to hear from some user groups related to the corridor. We're also working with an organization called Happy City to activate the space. So they were installing some rain paint along the corridor, I believe about a week or so ago, which you might see the next time it rains. So it's rain activated paint. It's invisible when it's dry, and when it's wet outside, you can see little messages on the sidewalk. They're also going to be working to paint some of the concrete barriers and install planters and do some engagement with Kakite Elementary School as well. And we also have a project website, which I'm sure the majority of you used to sign up for today's event. We've had over 3,000 visits to that website since we launched it in December. We have a questions tool where we've had over 100 questions asked on that tool, and we're continuing to get lots of feedback through that website. So we're going to go into a brief questions period, and we just ask that you refrain from providing any commentary or feedback on the Greenway. We want to keep this as brief as possible so that we have lots of time for you to provide feedback during the breakout rooms. And we ask that you use the chat to submit your questions. So you can submit those directly to Brian Patterson, who's listed as our host, and he will read out the questions as we get them.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. So I do see there's been one question provided so far, and this is about the balance between transit and private vehicles. So it's mentioning that the master transportation plan that the city has gives priority to walking, cycling, and transit ahead of private vehicles, and to follow that, whether transit routes should come first as a higher priority than car parking to do this. So that's definitely an important point, and again, recognizing priorities along the corridor. We do also need to make sure we're recognizing the needs of people who do live along the corridor and use the corridor as well, whether that's residents or people dropping their children off at school or otherwise. So it's a balance that we're looking to achieve here, and trying to find a way that best meets the needs of everybody along the corridor. But something we're continuing to look at as part of the final design. We'll be looking at how the overall street is functioning, and the parking and the transit routing. So yeah. There was a second question about whether there was any consideration given to the expected increase in traffic on Cunningham when the decision was made to close the Royal Avenue access to Maryvale. And I can speak to the fact that we have heard comments about increased speeds and volumes on a number of the laneways, Cunningham, Dickinson, Victoria in particular. And that would have been likely with the closure at Maryvale. And as I mentioned, we've been monitoring that. We've been collecting data, and we've heard from the input so far about people who've noticed increases in traffic speeds and volumes. So we're continuing to look at that, and there might be things we can do as we collect that data to look at how we can mitigate those impacts, because we certainly want to make sure we're not changing or creating impacts on other streets as a result of Agnes Street. So again, it's something we're monitoring, and we'll continue to make adjustments along the way if we do see from the data and from the public input that those speeds and volumes are increasing. There's a few more questions coming in here, so just bear with me. And some of these, again, in the next portion of the meeting, we're going to be getting into some specific questions about and discussions about how the Greenway is currently working. So I'll still read through a couple of these questions because we've got a couple of minutes here, but we'll be able to get into much more discussion in our small groups afterwards. So another question here was about the plan for rerouting traffic with Agnes becoming a one-way road and the school bringing considerable traffic to the neighborhood. So this comment, I guess what we were looking at with the one converting a couple of blocks of Agnes Street to a one-way road. We recognize, of course, the school traffic in the neighborhood, and moving it to a one-way street, a continuous one-way westbound between 4th and 6th. It has changed traffic patterns, certainly along the corridor. What we have seen is that traffic volumes have actually gone down on Agnes Street specifically through some of the data we've looked at already. But we recognize it's a change for people who do drive their children to school. And certainly the travel patterns we've noticed, of course, more traffic is using eastbound on Carnarvon to come along and come back westbound along Agnes Street, and considering those changes there. Yeah, and so that's kind of the idea. And one of the reasons, well, I guess there's a couple of reasons why we needed to look at that one-way conversion for those 2 blocks. There's probably 2 reasons. Firstly, is that provided the opportunity to preserve on-street parking for those blocks. We had to make trade-offs in each block about kind of vehicular traffic flow or on-street parking. To be able to fit the Greenway in, we couldn't necessarily have parking on both sides of the street and two-way vehicle traffic. So in the blocks between 4th and 6th, knowing there's quite a lot of demand for parking, we kind of prioritized on-street parking in those blocks over two-way traffic. I'd say also by converting it to one-way, that's helped to address some of the concerns we had heard about traffic volumes along the street. So that's helped to actually reduce traffic volumes and traffic speeds along Agnes Street. There was a comment here about 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limits that have been recently put in until First and Agnes, and whether it's possible to have it start from Royal and First. So we can put in until First and Agnes. So I think, yeah, those are, again, suggestions we can get into, and good suggestions for the interim design and for the permanent design. Will there be changes to the top of Maryvale to make access to push button to cross to Tipperary Park easier or safer? Mike, would you mind if I asked you to answer that question at the top of Maryvale, if there's any changes planned, or if you can speak to that?
Sure. I know, I think this is for somebody who cycles up the hill, and the way it's configured now, it's difficult to get to the button to activate the light. If it stays as is, we'll make some sort of accommodation for that, whether it's a video camera or some other detection system. I expect we'll do that. We just wanted things to kind of settle and see if we needed to make any changes. Just as traffic patterns changed and as we heard feedback from the community, but I recognize that's an issue.
Thanks, Mike. The last question, or series of questions we have here, is looking at accessibility. And the question is, when the cycling route ends and goes onto the sidewalk before going back to the laneway, has there been any consideration how people with visible impairments can be aware of the painted signage on the sidewalk? And follow up, how will people with visual impairments know that cyclists will be on the sidewalk? And I'm trying to understand which segment of the corridor this question is referring to. So if that person wants to type in any further detail describing the location, I'm wondering if this might be at Douglas College, where the Greenway ends and kind of goes into the plaza area, and near the school. It's
could be the curb extensions, Brian.
The curb extensions. Okay, thank you. Yes, that makes sense. So the curb extensions, these were a bit of a design challenge, and especially at the Maryvale intersection there. With the interim design, we were trying to implement something using the existing infrastructure. And at that location in front of the school where we had the curb extensions, we didn't want to remove those. Curb extensions provide a valuable benefit in reducing pedestrian crossing distances, but they certainly created a challenge for this design without kind of removing or redesigning that intersection. So we do have the bike lane that ramps up onto those curb extensions, and with those pavement markings there, which kind of indicates it's a shared use area, along with some arrows indicating how people should use those. It's certainly, I'd say with the interim design, we were working within some constraints, and it's not ideal. There's been some feedback about maybe whether we can add some signage or if there are other treatments to help explain how to use that, especially for people with visual impairments. That's certainly very important. And we're open for any suggestions. Maybe that's something we can talk about in the chat. With the permanent design, we'd be looking at a much more comprehensive redesign of that intersection. So if we need to, relocate curb extensions or remove and replace them with a better design, we will certainly have that opportunity. It was just tricky to try and kind of work with that existing infrastructure with the interim design, and is definitely a little bit confusing out there. So definitely an opportunity to improve that with the permanent design. There's a few more specific design related questions. So what I might do is just scroll to see if there's anything that's more related to kind of the process we're going through here, just so we can move into some discussions about some of these items here. Just bear with me. Maybe what I'll do is just read out the questions, but we can see about answering them in the discussion groups, or if the people who ask these questions, we can kind of re-ask them, but I'll introduce them just so everybody on the call can hear these. So first, looking at whether we're aware that the traffic reductions on Agnes by making one-way are directly related to increasing traffic on the other streets to accommodate the eastbound traffic. So again, that's something we're monitoring by having that one-way traffic westbound. We certainly do understand the potential impacts of more eastbound traffic on those adjacent streets. So something we're certainly continuing to monitor, and we'll look to adjustments and certainly look forward to any input or suggestions you have on that in the discussion groups. There was a comment again about Maryvale and Agnes where with the curb extensions and overlapping paths. Just a comment again about the question regarding accessibility, saying they're happy to hear this issue is being considered and that the city is home to many people with visual impairments. And certainly we understand that and recognize that. And accessibility is very much a priority of ours for the design, and especially with the permanent design. Those are really, really important considerations.
So we had a question about the survey. So I will grab a link here, and I will put it into the chat, and you can find the survey there. And so it does close on Friday. So we have a question. Brian, if you wanted to take this one, how does the Greenway link into the city's urban forest design plans? And actually, maybe that would be for Mike.
Sorry, so you'll have to, what's the question specifically? Is it
how does the Greenway link into the city's urban forest design plans?
Okay. I think officially it's called the Urban Forest Management Strategy. I think is probably what the person's referring to. And we are working closely with our Parks Department on tree planting opportunities because the city does have a goal for tree canopy citywide, and we will be working with the Parks Department to determine how we can make this project contribute to that goal. It is challenging when we're dealing with multiple modes of transportation and the space that all those modes require, but it's certainly one of our primary goals for the project is to incorporate trees into the corridor, more trees into the corridor than are there today.
Awesome. So we have another question. Why are so many residents of Agnes Street unaware of these plans? Example, not aware of the survey, not aware of the MAP-IT, in fact, not aware of this project until notified in November. So, we are trying our best to raise awareness for this project. The city is very active on social media. We sent over approximately 3,000 notices to households in the area, notifying them of this project. The city has also included this in engagement processes for the downtown transportation plan, among others. I'm not sure exactly what those engagement processes look like. I wasn't involved in them, but there has been ongoing engagement for this for a little while. We look to all of you to also help spread the word to your friends, your family, your colleagues, to get them involved in this process, so that we can get as many people involved in it as possible. Mike, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think Kelsey addressed it primarily, but I just would say that the Interim Greenway was a change to our approach to the project, using it as part of the engagement. It was an approach that started to be used really as part of cities around the world actually started implementing this type of infrastructure relatively quickly last year, partially in response to the pandemic, and allowing people space to move about on foot and on bike and be physically distant. So that aspect of the project was new, but as Kelsey mentioned, it was part of engagement processes for the downtown community plan, downtown transportation plan, and the downtown streetscape and public realm guidelines, I believe they're called. So it has been in the public sphere for a while, and there were engagement sessions as part of all those projects where this project would have been part of that. But so I think that's all I can say about that. Kelsey, I'd go back to you.
Thanks, Mike. So we have another question asking, who are the stakeholders? So there are a number of different stakeholder groups involved. We also have an Agnes Greenway working group that has been involved in this process for quite a while, even before the more public-facing engagement process started. In terms of stakeholders, Douglas College is one of them, Cookite Elementary School. We've been engaging with a PAC. There's the Downtown Walkers Caucus. There's the Downtown New West Residents Association, Hub, among other stakeholder groups. Will both sides of Agnes Street be treated or maintained, or just the south side? And I might throw that over to Brian to answer.
Thanks, Kelsey. We'll be looking at the whole corridor. A lot of the improvements will be focused on the south side because that's where the protected bike lane is, but we have certainly heard that there's improvement opportunities on the north side of the street as well. So we'll probably look a little bit more closely at the south side, but certainly if there are things we can do or that you'd like to see on the north side, we'd like to hear those, and we'll see if we can consider those as well.
All right. There is one transit-related question, so I'll just read that one out. Will you have the 103 meet up with the 105 to go uptown from, and then it stops. Candy, I'm not sure if you want to expand on that. I'm just scrolling down. Oh, it's been deleted. Okay. Has the city collected data on cyclist volume through the Agnes area? If so, is it available?
Sure, I can take that one. We've collected data for both Agnes Street and all of the surrounding streets, as I mentioned, and we've been collecting data on a number of things. We've looked at traffic speeds and traffic volumes, parking use, and pedestrians and cyclists. So we're just kind of going through and analyzing all of that data right now. But we collected that data back in November before we installed the Greenway, and then earlier in February. So we have before and after data that we can look at. We'll also be continuing to monitor, especially as we move into the spring and warmer months. We expect to see more people walking and cycling along the corridor. It hasn't been the best weather throughout the winter to see a lot of cycling, but we certainly want to track that over time. So I don't have any numbers yet, but it is something we have been collecting data on.
And we just got clarification on that last question. So will you have the 103 meet up with the 105 to go uptown?
Got you stumped, eh?
I can answer that. So I'm not exactly sure how you're envisioning they meet up, but currently they meet up on 4th Street. So if somebody did want to go uptown from the east end of Agnes, they could take the 103 over to 4th Street and transfer at 4th Street to uptown. I know that adds a transfer that is not as desirable as a direct route, but I don't know if I don't know if the person who asked that is thinking of other ways of connecting, but we are, as Brian mentioned, we're continuing to analyze transit and how the routes could be further adjusted to serve everybody's needs. We certainly have been hearing a lot about transit, and access to uptown in particular is a concern. So we're looking at quite a few different options actually, and in discussion with TransLink about how that could work.
All right, another question. I'm sorry, things are coming in and then it pushes what I'm reading down. I've been on the street a number of times and would say in the last 2 months, I've only seen 2 bikes on it. Economically, what was the financial justification for the project?
So all I can say is it's been part of the city's plans for over 10 years. We have the master transportation plan that prioritizes walking, cycling, and transit, and making cycling comfortable and accessible for people of all ages and abilities is a goal. And so this is the type of facility that will achieve that. We know that volumes right now are relatively low. There are a couple of reasons. One, it's still winter. 2, the Greenway is, it doesn't connect on both ends to, the Patello Bridge, for example. When the Patello Bridge project is finished, there will be a direct connection off of Agnes to the bridge. There will be a direct connection down to the Central Valley Greenway, and there will be a connection to Victoria Hill. And with the future phase of the project, it will connect even more into downtown. So, we acknowledge that cycling volumes aren't necessarily very high at the moment, but it's part of a network, or it will become part of a network, and these things are built out over time. So that's where we are right now.
And then we have one question about 6th Street. So have any changes been made on 6th Street yet, given the route was recently changed to go down and stop at Carnarvon?
So we haven't made changes yet on 6th Street. We have a plan in place. It would look very similar to what you see on this image here for the interim treatment, with a 2-way protected bike lane on the west side of 6th Street between Agnes and Carnarvon. It's anticipated that'll go in fairly soon. I think we're looking for kind of a good weather window to install that. So we don't have a specific date for when it would be installed, but it would be in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Brian. So we do have a few more questions, but I really want to make sure that we have the full 20 minutes for our first discussion period. So I will go through the questions and we can answer those via email, but let's just get started into our first discussion period.